listening to the Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are a part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, friend. Happy Tuesday. It's time for another episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast, and I'm so glad to have you joining me today. This was a sweet conversation with mom Deb Burma. Deb is an author and encourager of moms, and she mentioned specifically about situations in life happening that she didn't realize at the time, but later ended up playing such a significant role in her life, in her motherhood. And I felt like that was so relatable because sometimes what you're going through right now, you can only see that you're going through it and that you need to power through or enjoy it or whatever the case is for you experiencing it today. But later on, you're going to turn around and look back and say, oh, okay. I see how that situation, circumstance, season played into this perfectly today. I felt like that was so relatable when she started sharing about that. I can think of several times in my own life now where I turn around and look back, and that is absolutely the case. Before we get into my conversation with Deb, you know the drill. Please leave us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. So thrilled to be ranked in the top 10% of podcasts globally. However, I do know that the more reviews I get, the more 5-star reviews I get specifically, that ranking increases, which means more moms will be exposed to the motherhood experience. And who knows, it could be a friend of yours ends up hearing it and then ends up as a guest on the podcast. It could be that someone you've followed for a long time hears about the podcast and wants to come on and be a guest themselves. We just never know what's going to happen, but it all could happen because you took the time to leave a 5-star review, and I appreciate and thank you so much for doing that. And now that we've all given each other stars and pats on the back, let's head into this conversation with my guest, Deb Burma. Well, Deb, I am so thrilled to have you joining me on the Motherhood Experience podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Val. I've been so excited for this conversation and to finally make this happen, that I could be a guest. The Motherhood Experience, what a beautiful, beautiful, intriguing, purpose-focused title to your podcast.
Right? Doesn't it relate to all of us? I was just talking about this the other day. We all have like an idea or a plan of what we think motherhood will be. And then we get into it and it's nothing like we planned.
But it is truly all about the experience. Praise God.
Yes, yes. So I like to start every episode with the guests sharing ages of kids and stage of motherhood they're in. So why don't we kick off with that?
That's terrific. Thank you. Oh, Val, I can't even believe that I get to say this. As my children get older, I have to admit that, oh, wait, that maybe me too, right? So I have twins who are 30. I cannot believe they are 30 years old this year. I have twins who are 30, boy-girl twins, Christopher and Courtney. And then I have a son, Cameron, 3 years younger. So 30, and 27 are where my kids are now. My husband and I are in denial of our own ages. Yes, we got married young. Yes, we had children fairly young. But you know, I'm to where I'm like wanting to say I was 2 when I had my children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't work anymore. But yeah, that's where we are. So I am the very blessed mama of adult children. Yes, still young adult children, but still navigating what that looks like.
Yeah.
Having raised them, and while the Lord gifts us with many responsibilities and we wear many hats, we serve in a number of vocations. I will always say that second maybe only to wife would be being a mama.
Yeah.
And that is just, yes. So talking about my children, yes, please, let's do.
So were you the type of little girl who would always play house and always knew that she wanted a family growing up? Or is that something you kind of grew into?
That is a great question. I don't know that anyone's ever actually asked me that before. Yes, I was the little girl with all the dollies and the babies. And I knew that I was a romantic at heart, and the Cinderella wedding. And I know that that's not, reality, but Cinderella was my favorite princess growing up. And okay, that's such an aside, but perhaps that as a child, I just knew that it was, finding the one,
Mm,
and lots of prayer and tears and anguish during high school. I remember thinking, who would ever love me? What girl doesn't go through some form of insecurity? That though I wanted, I understood getting an education and career and all of this, but I was like, but I want to get married and have babies.
mhm.
And that is, some today would go, seriously, that's so old school, old fashioned, what have you. But I believe God wired me for that from the beginning.
Yeah. I have noticed in doing this podcast that it's a larger percentage of guests, I would say, who did have some kind of internal pull or draw from as far back as they can remember to be a mom, to nurture a family. There were some who just ended up becoming a mom when that wasn't what they planned, but they love it today. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, I guess, of how we as moms are wired and what we envision and believe motherhood for us will be. So your oldest
Yes.
are fraternal twins.
Correct.
Was that a total surprise?
Beautiful question. Absolutely, yes. So, yes, we were young. I had just finished college the year before they were born. So, graduation and job applications, continuing to work the part time job I had worked while I was in school. And we find out we are pregnant. And of course, I'm thrilled. And I know we can navigate this. And boy, do I try to control things that I ought not to have control over. Yes, that's been an ongoing episode after episode issue for me. But I remember thinking, we've got this. Yeah, we'll just start our nice little family and have a baby and work all these things together. And at just 10 weeks into my pregnancy, I did not know that the doctor I had chosen, she was a new OBGYN for me by the recommendation of a friend, happened to specialize in multiples and fertility. She's in suburban Dallas, Texas, huge clinic. She has her own in-house sonographer. So it is routine for this doctor to have a 10-week ultrasound.
Wow.
Not because we suspect anything, not because this was a high risk pregnancy. I didn't actually meet any of the markers. It was not hereditary in our family. All of the reasons that you might think, oh, yep, she's likely to have twins. But here we are at 10 weeks. And because she said, oh, bring your husband, this will be a fun appointment. We get to see a heartbeat. And we're there together. And she goes, oh, we have two. And my husband said, he leans in and we laugh to this day. He goes, to what? We know that we can't yet recognize at 10 weeks, two arms, two legs, two eyes,
Mhm.
especially with technology at the time. But to what? And I remember thinking for just a few minutes, no, what? No, because this wasn't my plan. Oh, I've always wanted to be a mommy, but wait, what? And really, a really special moment happened that while we're just coming to grips with we're going to be instant family. We're going to go from 2 to 4. And
Mhm.
she's right away warned us. Now, I already have to tell you, you now have a high risk pregnancy merely because you're carrying more than one. And as God would have it, okay, this is so fun. Big medical center in the center of Plano, Texas. Our church sat right next door. This tiny little, it was so cute, like as compared with this massive medical complex, right? But we're right next door. And our pastor and his wife had fraternal boy girl twins that were currently like in high school. But we remember thinking, so, little ultrasound pictures in hand, we went straight from there to the office, eyes glazed, little panicky. And we're like, here, we show, and he even goes, oh, so we're like, it's 2. And anyway, from there, so much joy, so much fear during that pregnancy too. Will I go into preterm labor? Will they survive? All of what you read, but just beautiful. We ended up giving birth just a couple weeks early after 6 weeks of bed rest. at the end of my pregnancy, but a very healthy pregnancy. We gave birth to twins that were almost 7 pounds and over 6 pounds. Yes.
Wow.
13 pounds a baby. Anyway,
Wow.
that was the beginning of our parenting, my motherhood experience. And I was quite panicky for someone who had known from forever that I'd longed to be a mama, prayed for this, and was the babysitter extraordinaire as a teenager, right? I was panicky. I remember my mother came to stay and she was like, I did not expect this from you. You are, but it was two. And we were, sleep deprived times two and all the things. And I remember crying. They're both crying. I'm holding them both. And, first day my husband has to go back to work and thinking, I will never sleep again. All the things, I will never sleep again. And yes, the days were long. That adage of the days are long, but the years are short. Well,
Right.
a young mama doesn't want to hear that when she's
Right.
just struggling to get through the day. But now I can say, yeah, absolutely true.
Yeah.
How are they 30 years old? That
Yeah.
was a super long answer to a short question.
No, it's fantastic. I'm curious, as you're a new mom to two babies at once, one boy, one girl. Did any part of you think like, you know what? I have one of each. I got them at the same time. I can hang up my coat from having, or hang up my hat from having more children, and we're just going to settle into this and enjoy it.
That is, again, how do you know all the
I don't.
perfect questions to
I
ask? Like,
don't.
thank you. Because so where we were I had worked at this crafters mall while I was finishing college, just before having my twins. And all of these sweet older ladies were my coworkers. They threw a shower for me and, they're running this crafters mall. And I remember bringing the babies in. And they meant well, but I can still hear these rich Southern accents go, oh, honey, you are done. They weren't asking, they were telling me,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
are done. Perfect little family. And I think that control person in me went, nah.
Mm,
So even though I wasn't ready to think about it for a while, I truly believe that was something the Lord kept laying on my heart. No, I
yeah.
have a plan for another child that, the plans and purposes for each of my children as I watch those unfolding today, certainly throughout their growing up years, but watching them fly away and bless others in their adult lives, I cannot imagine not having another. And I remember also thinking at the time, watching friends who had twins and that was it, or, kind of observing. We had several families in our church with fraternal boy girl twins. It was almost just comical. We were like, so there were littles, there was middle school, the pastor's kiddos were high schoolers. And I'm watching them, and some who had others, some who did not. But I remember thinking, are we to think this when they're babies? I don't know, but I did. Like, in 18 years, they'll leave at the same time. It's like I only had one, I watched those who like, how it's struggling with the empty nest, or, watching their children through the various stages. I knew I wanted to have at least one more child,
mm,
God willing. And yes. So 3 years later, they just almost exactly 3 years apart. So yeah.
wow.
And
And what is
easy pregnancy. Wow. Only one. Yes. My doctor was like, let's get you in here right away and find out if it's multiples again. I'm like, oh,
mhm,
really? Anyway,
mhm.
I'm sorry, you were saying.
No, I was going to say, like, what is the mindset then getting pregnant again? Are you thinking, is it going to be two? Is it going to be more? Is it going to be one? Like, were you able to just enjoy that pregnancy knowing it was a singleton?
I remember being anxious for that early ultrasound, and my husband again was with me. And while we weren't one bit disappointed it was only one, I was surprised that there was this tinge of like, that would have been really cool. Like, because
Yeah.
what if I always ovulate in multiples? So then though, the beauty and blessing, first of all, the fact that during my pregnancy, was the twins going from 2 to 3. And so, they're potty training and there's that goal in there by the time this one comes. And they had each other as playmates. There was so much that was special that I got to enjoy when Cameron was born. And from breastfeeding to just infant care with my two now 3-year-olds being mama's helpers. And the first year with him was so different than the first year with the two of them. Part of
Yeah.
it was those poor twins. They had new parents who did not know what they were doing. They always say, firstborn, you are our experiment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was calmer. I believe that impacted. I know you can't just control all of that, but with my twins, my daughter was very colicky and her poor twin brother had to just deal with it. And we joke about that today. And Cameron was just an incredibly easy baby. He slept early through the night. And I think a lot of that was how calm we were, at least in part. But it was, yes, the pregnancy and the birth, the infancy. Of course, we had a lot of people teasing us. Oh, after 2, this must seem like no sweat. Oh, it's still raising a baby.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it was
This
great.
little helpless, defenseless bundle in your arms still needs
Yes.
you 24/7. So, what about their relationship then as the 3 siblings? The twins always having a playmate since day one. Did they ever push their younger brother out or kind of dismiss him, or have they all been integrated and close all along? What is that dynamic?
Yes, great dynamics, honestly. Once he was old enough to play, there were things that the boys naturally started doing together. Once he was big enough that we then, the twins roomed together until Cameron was ready to leave the crib and go to a big boy bed. So then we put the boys together. She gets her own room. And I loved that she had that sense of independence there was a little bit of, I really focused on seeking to not compare them.
Mm-hmm.
As a mama of twins, reading, dialoguing with other moms of twins, I recognized that had they been the same sex, and especially if they had been identical, that's when you really are concerned about making sure they each know they're their own person, and that, not to compare everything at every point. But there were times that they had each other's back. They love telling now how they were defensive for one another. So I'll just start there with the twins, for instance, in 4-year-old preschool. My daughter still shares the story of she was a little more outgoing than her brother and she worried about him. And when it was his day to bring the snack, he really liked Nutri-Grain bars. And she, in her little 4-year-old brain, knew that that was an uncool snack to the other kids. And she was terrified that everybody would make fun of him because he was insisting Nutri-Grain bars is what he wanted the class to have. So even though she herself despised Nutri-Grain bars, she remembers sitting there, forcing herself to eat it and telling everybody they were yummy and delicious and it was the best snack ever. Because that isn't that beautiful though, that sense of
Yeah.
defending the one I'm going to go home and fight for the same toy with is the one I will defend to the end. And this is the classic family experience in a healthy family dynamic. I recognize that. But as soon as Cameron was big enough to play with them, it was really fun to watch the 3 of them play together.
Yeah.
And yes, then we hit the elementary years and my son reaches a period he's more outgoing than my daughter and he feels defensive of her when the middle school comparison bullying happens. Watching that kind of protection, fascinating to watch from a mom's perspective. But little brother keeping up with the twins, oh yes, he wanted to be right there in the middle of what they were doing. So I appreciated that. The only thing missing was my daughter would often say, why didn't you have a girl? Can't I also have a sister? That was a joke for a long time. And
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet. And what a precious memory to have of your kids as a mother. I am in the stage, my kids are 15 and 11. And so there is a lot of endearing moments between the two of them, but also a lot of at each other's throat moments between the two of them. But
yeah,
I imagine when they're in their 30s and late 20s that I'll remember the times that they were endeared to one another and
You will.
protecting one another's feelings and hearts. And that's so sweet.
I yes, mine were very much at each other's throats too. Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember that so well. Or like cramping each other's style, or does he have to come with us? All of that.
Right.
One thing that I thought of when you first asked the earlier question about, with the twins and then the younger, who, they had each other as playmates. We have found this to be interesting too. When I was growing up, I had two pretend friends. We just were on a family vacation a couple weeks ago, and we were all joking and laughing about it because my kids even know what my pretend friends, my imaginary friends, what their names were. And Cameron had an imaginary friend. And, the whole family knew it was but it was interesting. Chris and Courtney always had each other. And when
Mm,
they were gone to school, there were 3 years there that, he's home with mom. I was a stay-at-home mom, and they're doing their thing and they're more social, and he's still with me. And he loved to swing. And I think it was the big siblings. My husband built a swing set. We moved several times while they were little. So, this poor swing set got rebuilt and rebuilt. But it was the thing, he would just stand there and wait to get on the swing. He named his pretend friend Swing. So Swing was a part of our family. I mean, I'm not so sure he likes us joking about it now, but it's really, it was sweet because his imagination was going wild, and he was making up all these adventures that he and Swing were doing together. And
yeah.
it was fascinating to watch. The twins, I don't think it ever crossed their minds.
Mm. So this was like mid to late 90s when you're having kids.
Yes.
And you just said that you were a stay-at-home mom. Was that something that was not the norm? Did you struggle to find other moms who were also stay-at-home moms or who had kids the same age you did and they weren't working or
Yeah, it was an interesting mix. We had a beautiful mix. Where we were in Dallas, Texas, until during my pregnancy with Cameron, with my younger one, we moved to Des Moines, Iowa. And then those first 3 years. So I envisioned this time frame from birth to three for him. It was 3 to 6 for them. We were in this little bedroom community of West Des Moines, Iowa, and on our one block street, we were very active going, we learned right away in this new community, okay, the little local library has library story time certain days of the week. So we almost immediately met two other moms on our one block street. There were two other moms staying home with their kids. And I don't know if before or since I've been as good a neighbor as I was with these two moms who we every week had one day a week that was our play date.
mm,
So I was very blessed that I felt supported, that I certainly was not alone, and I hadn't seen that coming. In our church community, we had a suburban life out there, and it was a time where I would say it was right down the middle. We had a lot of working moms, a lot of stay-at-home moms. A MOPS program formed in my church that Cameron and I went to while the twins were in kindergarten. And I remember some of the moms with their creative hours of work could make it to MOPS, and that while I know that tension has always existed, and perhaps even the comparison, or are you pro working mom or pro stay at home mom? I felt blessed to be in a scenario where we sought to, can we put our big girl pants on and be nice to each other about this, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
recognize the various ways and what was working for each family, and respect each other in the process.
yeah. And
So, yeah.
I know that you have a heart for moms today. And so what were some of the things that you went through or experienced that really drew you to today providing encouragement for other moms?
Witnessing the needs that children have and helping moms navigate those needs, that she's not on an island, whether you're working or at home. And even with today's instant access to actually way too much material, which in some ways has, the backspin of that is that we're panic over everything, or are we doing the right thing by our kids? I don't know what I would have done without my fellow mamas as playdates, the support of
Mm,
my own mother, moms at different seasons of life who spoke wisdom to me. I remember just so much as witnessing moms with older children in group settings, in our small group, and that we had couples and children in a small group that my husband and I led, connected to our church. And then, even in group settings like worship at church, watching families and the dynamics, healthy and not so healthy. Also giving grace, recognizing maybe I'm just seeing a really rough moment, right? Once you've lived, boy, do we become less critical of other parents in the pew when we've been there ourselves. Lori and
Yes.
I love to say that we were very we don't love to, but we admit jokingly how terribly judgmental we were as a young newlywed couple without kids. Oh
Hmm.
my, God had a lot to teach us there. And I just want to be such an advocate for moms at every age and stage. I love the parents of teens in my church, for instance, right now. I find myself connecting with them a lot. I've traveled on several of our youth-led mission trips and events because I love interacting with the teens, even if it's not always so easy, but recognizing their need for other positive adults in their lives. So we're never too old or not in a season where if that's on our heart, we're we can always be, I guess is what I'm trying to say, always be in a place of support, encouragement, walking beside. The best thing we can do is walk the walk in such a way that it's winsome and somebody says, I want that too.
Mm-hmm.
The old adage of more is caught than taught. Well,
Mm-hmm.
let's engage with both and know that that is a 24/7 thing for families as they're growing through the lumps and as the kids learn what grace looks like,
Yeah.
because they're gonna mess up and we're gonna mess up as parents. And what does the humility look like that would have us as parents apologizing where appropriate, listening well, learning from our kids, but also commanding a healthy respect and authority in our homes as well. Whew, that's a whole lot. But that to say, I just saw that it wasn't something that I could just do whenever I felt like while I was parenting, whether they were right in my midst or not. They might be in school, they might be at a friend's home. Am I being their guardian and protector? But am I also not just protecting, but preparing, providing, helping them navigate because they would need to do that independently eventually. And as
Yeah.
terrifying as that is for a mama whose kids are all under her roof, it's coming. And I still remember it was during one of our small group gatherings, our little couples with kiddos in our home in Iowa. So that means my kids were somewhere, birth to 6. Another young mom was standing in my kitchen with me. And she was just one of these women that was quiet, but when she spoke, everybody listened because she had little nuggets of wisdom. And I remember her saying, from the moment they are born, we're preparing them to fly away. And I remember thinking on the inside, no, panic. What are you saying? But that she, with toddlers of her own, recognized they're not mine to keep forever or to hold back or to smother. I am to train them from day one. And that's it can feel overwhelming. And it is some days more than others. But what tougher job could we love more than this?
Mm.
The shaping of the next generation and our opportunity to do that and to know that we're not alone in doing that.
It's so true. And it's something that I've reflected on a lot. Also, our end goal, it seems, is to raise these completely dependent people to one day be completely independent people and striking the balance in there. And so that leads me to this question then, as you were talking about preparing them. How did you discern or prioritize what to prepare them for or in or with at different seasons of their childhood? Or did it
Yeah,
just
that's
happen?
well, part of it is to use the word organic, if
Yeah.
if I may, as in day in and day out. I felt better equipped when I was intentional in my own learning. And I'm not saying, wow, some book is going to give me all the answers, but Christ centered teachings. And at the time, we didn't have podcasts, but we had online materials that I would subscribe to so that good teaching that was happening, that was Christ centered, but navigating parents along the way. And also then alongside the parents in my midst,
Hmm.
being proactive so that sometimes I felt like it was to stay ahead of the overwhelm. But it's also, praise God, we just get one day at a time because we don't know what next year brings or what this next season in their development is going to bring. And
Mhm.
especially as puberty comes, and is that an antiquated word? I'm not sure what we call it now, but anyway,
Pretty sure we
yeah,
still call it that.
when hormones are shifting and raging and all kinds of things, I wanted to be very aware of, if I haven't stated this over and over already, Christ at the center of our home. Who will they seek and who will they remain dependent upon when they're no longer dependent upon us? And what that looks like lived out. So that's just a daily in and out. Not that I'm like pressing it on my brain or theirs every day, but I was very aware that culture was going to come at them from all kinds of directions. Our kids were in that in between phase where the first cell phones that my twins had were dumb phones. They were talk and
Mhm.
text. But by the time my youngest, it was right in that zone where by the time they left for college, they got their first smartphone. My youngest got his first smartphone in the last couple years of high school. And they would tell you today that they feel so protected that they did not have even accidental access to more than they ought during those middle school years when the brain is just not ready for all of that. When the prefrontal cortex is still underdeveloped and processing right from wrong and making huge decisions is just not something they're ready for. Thus, the reason they're still in their parents' home and learning and growing. So I found myself, even though I didn't have the smartphone to contend with yet, we did have a lot of internet access. We had a lot of that, teaching in the school. We had, of course, always the impact of peers and what they're hearing and seeing everywhere. And in hindsight, I remember thinking, I'm protecting them. I want to prepare them however best I can. Well, when my twins were 20 years old, my editor at my publisher tasked me with the project of writing a book about raising girls. And she could see that my daughter was already doing some writing, and my daughter collaborated with me on this. So she's in college writing this with me, and I'm trying to write about, godly advice I would want to give to moms while raising their children. And something my daughter said, so I put it in my book, was that my daughter got to high school and she had felt so protected. We were at a Christian day school through 8th grade, and then went to the big public high school. That just happened to be our experience. But she goes to the big public high school. At the time we were in Janesville, Wisconsin, big school, 1,000 kids in the high school. And she was too scared to tell me at the time that she was devastated with the language, the sexual innuendos, the things that were hitting her, like lambasting her as a freshman in high school. So later she said, and I put it in my book, that she was like, Mom, I needed to know more of that in the safe space of you telling me this is what this means. Yes, we'd had the talks about their changing bodies and all the sex talks. Yes, we had. But this was next level. And I remember I said, this is not an excuse, honey. This is not an excuse. But I didn't know most of those words. I didn't, I was naive myself. Are there always things we look back and wish we'd done different? Absolutely. So during those years, I was it was very present in my mind to be like, if you don't want to have regrets, remember to do this. Let's be proactive about this so we don't have to be reactive later. That doesn't mean we won't all mess up, but, conversations. And my husband at this point was their youth pastor, which some would say is really odd and hard, but they thought their dad was the coolest, even though I was very uncool during those years. Oh yes, just ask them. Mom, but during those middle school to high school years, their dad was their youth pastor, and he chose to delve into the hard topics. So, and I would have wanted the same for my kids had they been just I'm not saying that because we were the pastor's family, and we didn't become a pastor's family until they were in elementary school. So they knew what life was like in Dad's first career in the corporate world. They went, we all went to seminary together, and then they become part of a pastor's family. But they've said they really appreciated seeing that they're like, people didn't think we were weird, but we were just forgiven sinners too, just like everybody else. Again, a very long answer to a brief question. But these are the tough things. What did I find most important? Well, those things that they're going to battle, the ways that the evil one may seek to attack them, the ways the culture is going to encroach upon them. It's teaching them it's okay to have questions. Doubts are not, don't be ashamed of doubts even. Let's being really proactive to have the conversations, put resources in their hands. You can only protect to a certain extent. How are you also going to prepare?
Yeah. It's funny to me because my younger sister is the one who taught me or exposed me to those things that I was naive about.
Someone has to, right?
Oh, it still makes me laugh to this day, yeah, that my younger sister was like, "Val, do you know what that means?" "No, but how do you know what that means?"
Why are you telling me this? Yeah.
We go to the same school. Like, what's
Mhm.
happening here? Oh, yes. So, okay, you mentioned about a publisher, and so you are an author. Can you tell me how that era entered your life and what it was like to be writing books, encouraging other people, and parenting as well?
Yeah, my kids were really supportive, but I did grapple with how much that was distracting me because I was so excited when doors started opening. While my husband was at the seminary, I'd always loved, while he was in his first career as a stay-at-home mom, I found myself recognizing a need in our little suburban church community for an intergenerational curriculum that would resonate with parents and kids, that we would learn to somehow spontaneously act out Bible events together on the fly and narrator driven. So I was writing these, what we called spontaneous Bible melodramas, and helping kids and their parents engage together and truly enjoy, instead of what we do at church, sending us in different directions, we're doing something
Mm,
together. So this was a ministry that while we were still in Iowa, prior to my husband going to the seminary, as a mom of, at that time, my kids were 4 and 1. And I find myself I'm under the direction and help of another member of our church who was just had experience and giftedness in this. She mentored me, and I'd always loved writing. My first major in college was communications and broadcast journalism, but I hadn't used it per se professionally. So I wasn't even consciously thinking, oh, let's use that love for that with a need in my church. I just did it because here we are, and my kids are right here, and they will be impacted, and this is a family thing. So I was passionate about it. And actually that was one thing that, I was very, well, at first in denial that my husband, that we were going to pack up everything again and now go to seminary, and we would suddenly be, unemployed students family. That the doors God would open. I also was thrilled that he was doing what we both just absolutely loved, leading others in the word. And that's its own story of what led him there. But as a mom who then found herself, while he was at the seminary, the publisher that would become my publisher came on campus, and in cooperation with the seminary, taught a class for lay people and pastors could, for anybody, but on writing for the church, and recognizing that combination of, bringing in good, sound biblical content with creative writing. And that just fueled a fire that continued. And I found myself over the next couple of years taking more classes. Did not plan to stay connected with this publisher, but I met the woman who would become my future editor of women's ministry materials. I met her at that very first class, and she still loves to talk about that it was like 6 years later that I finally started writing for them. I was what I call in the trenches. I was writing and leading, and right there in the thick with my kids. When we got to our first call with my husband as a new pastor, I started that same thing again, that concept of intergenerational drama driven family ministry. So I was writing week in and week out for that. And when my future publisher, actually reached out and said, you're doing women's ministry, and we'd like to see what are you doing? We're interested. And I remember thinking, I don't have time to write, but I'm just barely keeping up week in and week out for my church, my family, my kids. And my kids knew that was my priority. But they were so excited when I got to start writing outside of that. So I guess you would say that any door that's been open to me, especially in those early years, writing for a publisher, I fell through the door backwards, being dragged through. I mean, when people are like, did you walk through that door? No, actually, I never intended to write for publication in those early years, but I wanted to be a better writer. I wanted to be biblically sound and engaging others right there on the home front. So we started women's retreat ministry in my church. And that was what caught the attention of my publisher. Women's ministry materials is primarily what I have written over the course of the last 15 years now. So a lot of books, Bible studies, and devotionals, even retreat kits for women's ministry. Now, how did that impact my kids? I look back and I'm like, oh, I remember being so distracted during a writing deadline. But I was also thankful that I was home. My writing career and what then started to become my traveling to speak career saw its greatest growth after they were out of the house. But some while they were in high school, and they loved that day in and day out. We are walking distance from our high school. And so, I'd be busily writing on something and they come home for lunch. They bring their high school friends with them. Our home was still a place that I loved. According to the giftedness and the desires that I had, I was still here at the hours I wanted to be. And that is not to say I was a working mom, but I was working from home. And for the mama whose primary central role is raising her kids, that's beautiful too. For the woman who finds herself in that creative place of, I work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday outside the home, and I'm navigating that. Kudos to you too. This was just my story, not prescriptive of anyone else's. But yeah, navigating that was interesting. I mean, I can remember the kids came up with some cheers for me. Like, you got this, Mom. And when they were in college, and I'd be like, okay, I'm under this writing deadline. I really need your prayers. And it became our prayer peace code, because they knew that it was, that big popular phrase out there in culture was, you got this. But we would laugh going like, no, at the end of the day, you really don't got this, Praise God. He has you in his grip. And that's the only reason you could ever say you got anything at all. Right. But it became like they got me a mug. I had coasters. I had wall signage that all said, you got this. Because they were like, wink, wink, nod. Mom, that's, our little prayer peace code here. So that's how they have always been extremely supportive of my writing.
I love that story too, because it illustrates the point that things that you experience and go through in life, you don't understand it at the time, but it's paving the way for your purpose down the road. And something that seems maybe insignificant is actually going to really define certain moments in your future as a mom, as a woman, as a wife. I love that story so much. I'm glad you went there. I'm glad you went there. Yeah. A couple things now. One being, how would you encourage or direct a mom who might be wondering if what she's doing today with her young kids or with her teenagers is going to matter or come into play or have a significant role in their lives later on and in her own life later on? And maybe she's just frustrated and overwhelmed and thinking, does anything I do make a difference today? What would you say to encourage her?
I would tell her what my husband told me. Let's go back to Iowa. My kids were somewhere between 0 and 6, all three of them. And I would say it was on the earlier end. I've got an infant and 2 3-year-olds who are still struggling to finalize the potty training success. And I remember weeping to my husband because I saw these opportunities for serving at church in that voluntary capacity that I knew I had the flexibility to do so, but I didn't want it to take away from what I was doing at home. But is what I'm doing at home matter? Oh, I've got this tugging going. And I remember thinking, most days I barely get the dishes done. I keep up with what's in the diapers. All I'm doing is keeping up. Does it really matter? And I wailed this to my husband. Does anything, is this all there is? And he said, Deb, daily, minute by minute, you are impacting your children's lives for Christ, for their own wellness, their own future. And if they are, this was the part that I quoted in one of my books, if these 3 are the only lives difference that you made doing what you are doing right now, the Lord says to you, well done, good and faithful servant. ugh, I was like, why did he always have such words of wisdom? No, but I can remember that moment like it was yesterday, and how much I needed to hear the value of what I was doing is huge. And I'm reminded in a Bible study that my small group is currently going through that is talks about the one at a time nature that Jesus would reach out to people. While people want, yes, he necessarily was speaking to masses and healing all over the place, an exhausting, constant ministry, right? But he recognized the needs for his little group of disciples to get away by themselves. He recognized and sought out the woman at the well, that, he's on his way to heal Jairus' daughter with the crowds thronging about him, and a bleeding woman touches the hem of his robe and he stops just for her. And I say this because Jesus was about the one at a time. Why did he care about little Zacchaeus up there in the tree? One at a time. It isn't about the hordes of people that we're going to impact, but we, more than anyone else besides their dad, get to impact our kids. So even when the days are long, and even when it feels like I don't understand how laundry can matter in the future, you are teaching your kids way more than you know, even in the moment. You're teaching them the stick to itness. That's not the right word I'm looking for, but that's the best I can do in the moment. You're teaching them about responsibility, and that their needs matter to you. You're teaching them what it is to put someone else's needs ahead of your own, to be others oriented. And culture screams at us that it's all about us and we're number one. And it's countercultural to say, no, someone else comes before me. And your kids get to see you do that for them every day. Even if they don't recognize it or can't sit there and fully verbalize it. I am very blessed. And, and I'm not saying there aren't lumps in the road and struggles that I or my children, oh my goodness, we all have them. But I love that I can have conversations with 3 adults now who say, Mom, yeah, of course you messed up. Remember when you did this? And boy, yes, they do remember those things too. But that at the root of it all was a desire for their best. And they know that. And we can talk through all of that now. And they can say, hey, thanks for this. And that's one of the things I find most helpful to parents who are in the trenches right now, is to tell them, guess what? Your 25-year-old it may take to that age when the brain is fully developed for them to be able to say, yo, Mom, when you did that, I didn't like it then, but thank you that you didn't stop doing that, because it's what I needed. And boy, there is fruit in looking back at that. Even as our young adult children, I'm going to say it again, and we make mistakes in our adulthood and throughout, that we have a God whose grace is greater than our mess ups. And so mamas, when you're right here in what I might call the messy middle, know that God, even right now in your messy middle, God sees the completed picture. And he sees the people that you and your children are becoming, because we are continually, as long as we are living, we are in transformation. He is growing us. He is changing us. He is molding us. And Val, you have said it so well in any number of ways throughout our conversation, that he's using this, even this. As you're asking me to mention things, it's now getting to look back at how God did use something.
Yeah. So speaking of using things, and our conversation segueing into this, how can people find more of what you have written, contact you for speaking opportunities? Where can they contact you and follow you?
I will make sure you have this to put in the show notes as well. But I have a website that is simply debburma.com. So DEBBURMA.com. My website for all of my ministry details. Through that, I start there because even though my books are all available, my publisher is beautiful about, my publisher is Concordia Publishing House out of St. Louis, Missouri. That is simply cph.org. But all of my books are available on Amazon. Just type in my name. They're also available at christianbook.com and, other Christian booksellers. They're available through Barnes & Noble, because that's how our publishers collaborate, which is awesome. But you can reach out to me personally at my website. There's a place where you can, contact me. And my email is simply deb@debburma.com. So please, yes, absolutely. My speaking schedule is on my website, my topics, my books, blog posts that I write. Way too much information, photos of my family. I don't know. You can go and just, learn about my awesome kiddos who are adults now at a picture's glance.
Well, Deb, I so appreciate you, first of all, just responding to the connection that was made, introducing us. And Jessica, I know you're listening, and so thank you for making this connection. And also just for the encouragement, I feel like this wasn't an episode necessarily to dive into the motherhood life of Deb, but it was what can Deb pour out to the listening moms and cover and encourage them with. And so thank you. I appreciate that. And I know the listeners will as well. So thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, Jessica. I just called you. Hi, Jessica. Absolutely, Val. I wanted to make sure I spoke into the one who connected us for such a time as this, for this purpose today. Thank you. Thank you, Val.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook or Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.